Hey, thanks for joining me. You know I love me some Planetary, and it's my one of my most favorite comic books of all time, and I really enjoy revisiting these books, and it's just one of my favorite things. Except for this issue. This is the one issue out of the entire, I think it's 27 issue run. This is issue 21, so we're getting close to the end, honestly. But this issue pissed me the fuck off when it came out. I was mad. Now, did the art suddenly change? No. Did the storyteller, did the writer, did the concept, did the idea suddenly change? No. So what could possibly happen that would piss me off? Well, as the comic went on, I'm trying to remember. I think the original first issue was published in, like, I want to say 99. And this thing, let me find it. This is 2004. So we're on issue 21 in 2004. So if you understand the concept, American comic books are typically supposed to be released, generally speaking, on a monthly basis. But if we're on issue 21 from the year 1999 to 2004, again, I'm kind of guessing off the top of my head when this book started. I'm pretty sure it was 99. If I'm wrong, the point still stands, is that the publishing schedule on this book got to be drastically delayed. I'm pretty sure I don't think they mentioned in real time when the book was being published. It wasn't until way later. I seem to remember Warren Ellis, the writer, explaining that he had some things going on in his life. I think his father was getting sick and or died. Just that the writer had a whole bunch of shit going on that just threw his schedule way off. And I guess, I don't know if this affected everything he was writing, but it affected the shit out of this one. And so there would be vast lengths of time in between issues. And so anytime one showed up, I was so excited because I'm like, finally, I am so into this book. I'm so into the story. And again, we're on issue 21. This whole thing has been building and building and building to this ultimate confrontation that we're getting real close to. And again, it might have been a year in between issues. So when I got this, I remember there was this comic book store at this mall that I would go to. It's been torn down. It doesn't exist. But I was so excited. I go there. There's a copy of Planetary. I get the books that I picked up. I go down to the food court. I get me a drink. I get me some snacks. And the first thing I wanted to read was this fucking book. Even if I just flipped through it and kind of peruse it, I just had to see what's going on. And so I started flipping through it. I'm like, okay, yes, hell yeah. Warren Ellis, John Cassidy, writer, artist, colorist, everything. And then I'm like, okay, these characters are sitting around and they're talking. Okay. And then they're sitting around and they're talking. And then there's weirds, and they're sitting around and they're talking. And they're sitting around and they're talking. And then they're sitting around and they're talking. And they're getting into weird visual imagery. And there's, what the hell is going on? What is all of this? And they're sitting around and they're talking, and then Elijah Snow gets up and leaves. I was like, what? Because I wanted to know more about the main story that was going on, the Four. I've talked about this as I've reviewed these comics, where there's all these little isolated, feel like self-contained stories that ultimately, as the comic goes on, you start to find out that for the most part, they're all connected into the same kind of narrative going towards an ultimate goal, which is the end battle against the Four. I've mentioned the evil Fantastic Four. They're the villains of this book, and we're getting there. And I waited so long in between issues, and this is one where nothing happens. It's just Elijah Snow having a conversation in some weird background. So then I'm like, okay. Then I tried to read it back in 2004. And I'm like, I could not get through it because I'm like, what the fuck are we talking about? I was mad at this book for so long, for all the reasons I just described. It's so long in between issues, and I'm so interested to get the next chapter. And this thing wasted my time. Now, in retrospect, if you read all these books together, and you're not delayed a year or a year and a half or whatever the case may be, this doesn't interrupt anything because you could just move on to the next one. But when you're like, I've waited a year for this and I might have to wait another fucking 12 months for the next issue. Did we have to dedicate this whole issue to whatever the point was? It pissed me off. This is the one issue that made me mad. Now, I've gone through and I've read it. This is Warren Ellis, I feel like, getting into kind of like a science-y and magical kind of explanation with kind of a combination of his own personal thoughts and understanding of science and technology and magic, combined with trying to create some interesting narrative points that fit the book. And he's just kind of going off on these weird tangents that are kind of hard to explain. This book is hard to explain. If I had to sum it up, Elijah Snow is kind of been like, he's on his quest to end the evil Fantastic Four. What is his role in life? What is he supposed to do? You know, he's going to seek advice from this character who's kind of like a mystical shaman, kind of a Doctor Strange type character. Kind of like you see the symbol on the door. It kind of reminds you of the Stephen Strange, like that window, that symbol that he has. Elijah Snow comes and meets her. I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce her name. Melanctha, Melanctha. Melanctha, I think. I'm here for my consultation. So she says, it's been a while, Mr. Snow. What you looking for? He's like, well, the evil Fantastic Four, the 4 are now 3. I need to find a way to reach the remaining 3 and take them out of the picture. So she just kind of looks and she's like, I see. Which of the 4 have you already painted out of the picture? He's like, Jacob Green, which is the thing, which we saw in the last issue, where the ancient million-year-old spaceship that contained Galactus's dead body was passing by Earth, and we got to go up into it, and the thing went up to it, and Elijah Snow trapped him on that ship, so the vessel would travel out of our galaxy, out of our solar system, away from Earth, eliminating the evil thing from the story. And she's like, okay, that's interesting. Have some tea. She has black currant and vanilla tea, or he says black currant and vanilla tea. He says, I haven't had this since France, the first time you needed to steal a march on a situation and felt it necessary to consult. So she's like, we've met before, and I've given you this way back when. And so she's like, you consulted me, and she stops. She's like, well, what is it people call me? Like, when people ask you, what do people call me? She's asking. And he says, I say I'm visiting a magician. She's kind of like, huh, yeah. She says, you have to understand that I'm not a magician as it is commonly perceived, nor am I a shaman or an oracle. I'm a scientist. So again, this is Warren Ellis getting into how magic is just kind of enhanced science in a way, understanding the rules of the world and being able to manipulate them in a way that most people can't in the physical world. It feels like magic, but it's more like manipulating reality, and it's kind of hard to explain. But and I feel like Warren Ellis has a big kind of appreciation for that kind of thing. So then she starts going on. She dips into the tea, gets her finger wet, and it's going to play into the visuals of this. She starts talking about a guy years ago, a physicist named so-and-so, gave a lecture entitled There's Plenty of Room at the Bottom. His thesis was that in a period concerned with mega engineering and macro scale physics, we were not directing the correct attention to the micro scale. We contain universes. There are vastnesses in every grain of sand. So talking about how we're thinking about building things and understanding things on like a mega engineering scale, she says, and macro scale. Big, like galactic, looking at space, stars, gravity and time and all these giant things. But she's like, we don't look at the microscopic parts of the universe, which is what she's kind of saying you need to pay attention to here. And so she starts talking about the bleed, which is a concept that was introduced. It's like the bleed is like the term they use to describe the walls between universes, like multiverses, and people can traverse the bleed and go to different worlds. She's like, you spend a lot of time considering the bleed, the very veins of the multiverse, the biggest construction humans have yet conceived of. In this consultation, I want you to consider the microscale, the invisible forces that hold us together. So as she draws out the liquid from the cup, forming shapes that become symbols that you can zoom in and see the tiniest things. She talks about scientists talking about opening up an entirely new field of quantum physics, things like talking about nanotechnology, construction on the scale of bacteria, building machines from individual molecules and the elements of molecules, making germs from metals and minerals, germs with arms that can move molecules around. So she's talking about things on the most microscopic level. So again, I was reading this going, what the fuck does this have to do with anything? Like, it sounds interesting, but God damn it, I want to know, where are we going with this? It feels like such a waste of my time. Then the character starts explaining stuff and getting into atomic level of, micro scale. We go down farther and farther. We can descend even further into this. The art of disassembling atoms themselves. This is not fiction. Already physicists are achieving this kind of technological change with $100,000 lasers. Imagine remodeling individual atoms with light. The manipulation of quarks and the creation of strange exotic forms of matter. So there is a point how she's getting down to the idea of like, we can manipulate things down to the most microscopic level. What does this have to do with anything? She says in 1993, a major earthquake in Antarctica was explained as two strangelets passing through the planet, two clumps of quantum level artifacts, each the fraction of a breadth of a human hair, and it shook this world. Now, I'm pretty sure this is probably something that is a realistic scientific kind of idea that Warren Ellis is building into his narrative for the planetary world. And so she just keeps going on. And beyond quarks and strangelets and chronometers and atometers, what might lay there? Beyond the baryonic limits of this universe's construction, if above us there is the bleed and your glorious ultra-scale arrangement of the universe, above us, what lies below us? In archaic times, when the universe seemed much smaller, we believed our dead to accompany us everywhere. So she gets into some kind of like spiritual kind of description, basically that kind of the idea that when people die, everyone has a soul, but the soul is just energy, and energy can't be destroyed. It just kind of changes form. It says here, like, scientists have theorized that souls do not die. Souls are some form of electromagnetic field that continue to inhabit the body after death. She continues saying, like, our bones crackling with strange and imperceptible energy activity, and we buried them. So, like, there's still a form of living energy in our dead bodies, and we bury them in the ground. They're in the earth. And she wonders, like, is that energy, are the souls, are they still aware? Can the dead perceive? We don't know. Is that what happens? We lay in the dirt, still somehow aware of being in there, which is a frightening concept. Of course, this flies in the face of kind of standard, like, life after death, kind of, ascending to a heaven or a hell or something like that. It's just an interesting kind of alternate take, removing the philosophical religious conversation and just like scientific, like, this is energy. And is the energy, it never dissipates, it never moves, is it still aware? What happens to this energy that we put in the dirt? She says, some cloud of being beyond these boundaries, a sort of life laying in our old bones. We buried them infecting the dirt with our souls. We buried them, scattering the land and water with the living ashes of our souls. And gravity draws us into the earth, and plants grow. So again, it's like the idea that our souls are still alive as energy. We bury it into the ground, into the water, into the air, but specifically into the ground. As gravity draws this energy into the earth, and then plants grow from the earth where this energy of our souls exists. And so she goes on to explain all these different kinds of scientific names of things that are hard to pronounce. Some of them, like it says peyote, cyclobin, stropharia, things I don't know about. I'm pretty sure are probably realistic things. She's like, drugs that come from plants. And if you're following the line of thinking, we're like, drugs coming from plants that are affected by the dead souls of living beings. She says, historically, we consider them shamanic drugs, and they were overlaid with ritual and religion and the other crap of archaic societies. But all societies had their speakers to the dead and their oracles who looked into other places. In legend, the oracle at Delphi stood at a pool and inhaled its vapor. It was recently found that a vent beneath the pool expressed ethylene, a hydrocarbon gas that creates an euphoric derangement into the water. And talking about how this is all like a plant hormone. It gets so complicated. It's hard for me to kind of break it down because I don't exactly understand it outside of the basics. Basically, she's saying that the dead in the ground, their souls oiling out from their bones into the earth, into the roots that effervesced into the clouds, that the oracle inhaled to see the worlds, into the plants that are speakers to the dead ingested to do their business, the drugs that were in your tea. So it's a long way to explain, to get the concept across, if I'm understanding it correctly, that dead souls infecting the earth, growing from plants and being shot out into the world, into plants, into the air, raining down back upon us to create these things that we ingest. We're ingesting dead souls of people, which is how it gives us the magical kind of connection to otherworldly explanations and perceptions that we normally are not able to do. If I'm understanding it correctly, it's a wild idea that's very interesting. She says, you don't need to panic. The effect will only last 5 minutes and you'll hear my voice throughout. I'm not sending you down there alone. She says, just as the bleed forms a boundary around the macro world, so there is a wall beyond the micro scale. I have given you the key to it. This is Huxley's door of perception, sending you to a place beyond the sight of our microscopes. So now Elijah Snow is having some kind of crazy drug trip. She's like, what do you see? And he's like, a flower. So there's this pattern. She says, is there motion? He's like, yes, I'm moving towards it. She says, good, break through to the other side, Mr. Snow. Like, explain to me what you're seeing. So here's him on his drug trip, traveling through the flower, busting through it. And she says, this is archaeology, Mr. Snow, dream archaeology. You're in the world of the dead, an ecology of souls. The world beyond, Mr. Snow, the underworld, Valhalla, the Bardo, heaven. I'm right here, Mr. Snow. Tell me what you see. So he's having these crazy visions of all this kind of undefinable imagery because he's having a weird drug trip going down into other worlds. He says, something's happening. I'm standing on a floor of melted mirror. I don't know. And things are jumping out of it like salmon. And she says, that's right. This is their home. Understand, this is not a hallucination. Are they talking to you? And so these little weird balls of liquid mirrors are floating around him. And he says, they're exhaling. She's like, okay, that's kind of like what we're talking about with these drugs being exhaled into the world. She says to him, remember what you learned in Africa, Mr. Snow? Perhaps it was no coincidence that you gained this knowledge in the cradle of the human race. Everything is information. So Snow says something the Japanese something like the Japanese kanji for life, and the shape that reminds me of the transhumanist symbol suggesting growth and emergence, DNA code, and the death tarot card, which symbolizes change. So she says, they're telling you what they are. Isn't it extraordinary? They don't want you to be frightened. So they're floating around him. So then they bounce away and go away from him. He's like, well, then they're backing off. Why? And she says, you met a man in Hong Kong who had died and swore there was no afterlife. Perhaps he never saw this, Mr. Snow. I wonder why. But they're talking about, I think it was like issue 2 or 3 of the series, this thing where they met a ghost in Hong Kong. It was an interesting book. He says, they're avoiding me. She says, yeah, I imagine they are. Why do you think this is? He says, well, maybe that's what they do. Wait, no, hold on. They're approaching. They're surrounding me. They're saying I don't belong here. And so she says, well, why do you think this is? He says, well, what are you, a psychiatrist? And she says, ask them, Mr. Snow. And so you get a real close-up on these little bubble things, and there's like DNA, the CGAT, CAGT, like DNA, and the code. It says, someone once created in a computer space an object whose every facet threw a unique shadow that formed one Hebrew letter. It therefore follows that there could be an object whose every facet generates one letter of every language there is, and every language there could be. Informational super objects existing outside history, and you're surrounded by them. So ask them. So he reaches forward and kind of touches one of them, and it kind of bursts. Snow says, they're saying I don't belong here. It's a complex thought. They're saying I'm outside the system. He says, it's not that I'm here while alive. It's that I'm not alive. They're saying I'm not alive and I'm not dead. I'm outside the system. So the wizard girl, she says, that was my supposition too. He's like, I don't understand. She says, Mr. Snow, you were born on January 1st, 1900, one of the so-called century babies, all functionally immortal. And Snow says, but we died. Jenny Sparks died. Hark died. Blackstock died. All of them. And the century baby concept is something that's been brought up in the comics that Warren Ellis has created. And it's a very interesting thing. I actually really like it a lot. But they're kind of getting into this a little bit. But she says they ended. But did they die? Did they have souls? You and your peers, Mr. Snow, all born on the same day, all possessed by superhuman capability. Does that strike you as a natural occurrence? She says, you don't belong there because you are not human. You are not part of the system, the natural order of things. You are constructs. He's like, they're going away. And he says, I don't want them to go away. She says, certainly you all have different functions. Certainly you are all self-aware and unique individuals. But here is the proof. Down here on the factory floor of universal existence, you are not naturally alive. And he says, I didn't want them to go away. And she says, you are a thing created to do a job, Mr. Snow. And that job cannot simply be to hound 4 people who did you wrong to the ends of the earth. Look around you. When the grounds of the underpinnings of life and death, laid beyond the tiniest spaces we can imagine, are this infinitely vast... When the grounds of the underpinnings of life and death, laid beyond the tiniest spaces we can imagine, are this infinitely vast, can your task be so small a thing? And he comes back to the real world, kind of shocked. And she says, it's a strange world, Mr. Snow. Never lose sight of it. And she just says, you can leave now. And he picks himself up. He's kind of shocked and weirded out, pulls his coat up over his head, or around his collar, and just walks out into the snow, confused, unspeaking, and it says to be continued. So again, if you've seen all the previous issues, this one pissed me off because I'm like, what the fuck was the point of all that? It was such a waste of time considering the gaps of time in between these issues. But getting to see it, I get what Warren Ellis is doing to a point. He's basically showing that Elijah Snow is a being that was created by the elements that existence controls. He was created for a specific task in this universe. He's not just there to go beat up villainous bad guys. He's got a greater goal, and he needs to see things in a grander scale. And it gets, I do like the idea of discussing how souls are energy that doesn't ever die. We bury them, and the souls infect the natural world, and then they come back up, and we breathe them in, we smoke them by accident at times, and that's our kind of like magical connection to the afterlife. It's a weird thing that I'm probably not explaining exactly correctly because I don't quite get it, but it's an interesting idea about the idea of souls and energy and being connected to the planet, but then getting into how Elijah Snow is a being created for a specific task and a specific goal, and she doesn't give him all his explanation. She doesn't define everything. She's like, this is something you need to think about. Go about your world. And so off he goes into the world. So I was mad at this issue forever for all the reasons I've explained. I do appreciate it in the grand kind of scheme of things. If you read these books all together and read them as one story, it probably works just fine. But at the time, God, was I pissed. But as always, Warren Ellis crafts stories the likes of which I'd never seen before. And there's kind of an underpinning and an understanding of science and imagination that Warren Ellis just carried that just blows me away to this day. He's got an entirely different take on things and a very specific kind of approach to things that I love. I like so much. I've never read anything that he's ever written that I thought sucked. I have not read everything he's done, but the things that he's done, like Authority is great, Stormwatch was great, Planetary is incredible. It's weird, but at the time when these books were spaced out, man, was I mad. I hated this fucking book because it didn't give me what I wanted. Every other book is amazing, but this one's kind of like a sudden stop to go into this like magical kind of like bullshit philosophical explanation that he wanted to get into. And I feel like it could have been shown in like 5 or 6 pages, but that's just me. I don't know shit. I'm a nobody. Anyway, Planetary number 21, pretty dang interesting, even if it frustrated me at the time. That's all I've got for this one. As always, thank you for joining me. I really, really appreciate it. I'll see you next time.